In the sleek corridors of Langston Innovations, where ambition gleamed like polished glass, 58-year-old Elijah Hayes pushed his maintenance cart with quiet purpose. 20 years ago, he'd been at the cutting edge of AI engineering. Now he fixed leaky faucets while CEO Clayton Riker barely acknowledged his existence. Executives discussed their failing prototype vehicle in hushed tones, unaware the janitor overhearing them had once pioneered the very technology they struggled to perfect. When Clayton's expensive car failed dramatically in the company parking lot, his mocking challenge, "Fix this and the car's yours," was meant to humiliate. Instead, it became the moment when invisibility transformed into undeniable brilliance, and a forgotten genius reclaimed his rightful place in a world that had tried desperately to erase him. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The sun hadn't yet crested over Chicago's skyline when Elijah Hayes arrived at Langston Innovations. At 58, his steps were measured but purposeful, his gray-peppered beard neatly trimmed against his dark skin. The security guard, Bill, nodded with genuine warmth. "Morning, Elijah. Another early start?" "Only way to get things done right," Elijah replied, his voice carrying the gentle weight of years. The gleaming 40-story building housed some of the brightest minds in technology, but few arrived before 8. Elijah liked these quiet hours. They reminded him of a different time. He changed into his Navy maintenance uniform in the small locker room, hanging his worn tweed jacket carefully. The name patch on his chest read simply, Elijah. No last name, as if his role didn't warrant the full identity. He gathered his cart of supplies and began his rounds. By 6:30, Elijah had already fixed 3 things that weren't strictly his responsibility. A flickering light in the women's restroom on the 18th floor had been bothering Sarah from accounting for weeks. The maintenance request had been filed, but no one had bothered. Elijah replaced the ballast with practiced hands. On the 22nd floor, the office printer had been jamming regularly. 2 IT technicians had declared it needed replacement, but Elijah recognized the issue immediately. A small piece of metal slightly bent out of alignment. With a pocket screwdriver and careful pressure, he corrected it. He left no note, took no credit. In the executive kitchen, a leaky faucet had been dripping for days. Elijah tightened it with his wrench, wiped down the sink, and moved on before anyone could arrive and see him there. These small repairs formed the invisible scaffolding of his days, problems noticed, solved, and forgotten, much like Elijah himself. The building began to fill as 9 o'clock approached. Engineers with coffee mugs hurried past him. Financial analysts in pressed suits barely glanced his way. Elijah became, part of the background, a fixture like the potted plants or exit signs. At precisely 9:15, a commotion rippled through the lobby. Clayton Riker had arrived. Clayton was 43, though his expertly tailored suits and twice-weekly personal training sessions were calculated to make him appear younger. His salt and pepper hair was styled in the casual but deliberate way that cost $300 per cut. As CEO of Langston Innovations, he moved through the building like he owned the air inside it. "Morning, team," he called out with practiced enthusiasm, not actually looking at anyone. His gaze remained fixed on his phone as he strode toward the private elevator. 3 executives followed in his wake, briefcases clutched like shields. Elijah was mopping near the elevator when Clayton approached. He moved his cart to make way, but Clayton's attention was fully on his screen as he gesticulated wildly during a call. "I don't care what the supply chain issues are, Mark. We promised a prototype by quarter's end, and I'm not going back to the board with excuses." As Clayton stepped forward, his Italian leather shoe caught the edge of a wet patch. Elijah's hand shot out instinctively, steadying the CEO's elbow before he could slip. Coffee from Clayton's travel mug sloshed forward, but instead of hitting Clayton's crisp white shirt, it splashed onto the floor, directly in the path of Elijah's mop. Clayton ended his call and finally glanced at Elijah, recognition flickering briefly in his eyes before being replaced with impatience. "Watch where you're cleaning," he muttered, straightening his jacket. "Just doing my job, sir," Elijah replied quietly. Clayton scoffed. "Yeah, know your lane." The elevator doors closed, leaving Elijah alone with the spilled coffee and the lingering sting of dismissal. Later that morning, Elijah paused outside meeting, room 12B. Inside, raised voices debated technical specifications. Normally, he would continue past, but a particular phrase caught his attention. "The diagnostic test failed again," came a frustrated voice. "The self-learning protocol keeps hitting. A recursive loop. We've got 3 weeks to get this vehicle functional," another voice replied. "Clayton's betting the company on this." Elijah lingered, his ear tuned to the technical jargon flowing from the room. He recognized the problems they were describing. Issues of algorithm architecture, not unlike puzzles he had once solved in another life. A young woman approached, startling him. Her ID badge identified her as Zoe Mitchell, engineering intern. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and curious eyes studied him behind round glasses. "Excuse me," she said, and Elijah quickly moved his cart. "Sorry, miss. Just heading to the supply closet." She nodded, but something in her expression suggested she didn't quite believe him. By midday, Elijah was working on the 32nd floor, where executive offices lined the perimeter. As he replaced a light bulb in the hallway, the elevator opened with a soft chime. 2 engineers emerged, frantically pressing the call button for another elevator. "Damn it, not again," the taller one said. "Third time this week," replied his colleague. "The up button on 12 is totally fried." Elijah watched as they departed in frustration. Once they'd gone, he rode down to the 12th floor. Sure enough, the up button had been pried open, wires exposed. Someone had attempted a fix and made it worse. With practiced movements, Elijah opened his tool pouch and extracted a small soldering kit. 5 minutes later, the button was working perfectly. As he packed away his tools, the elevator arrived with a soft ping. Zoe stepped out, surprise registering on her face. "Did you just fix that?" she asked. Elijah shrugged. "Simple wiring issue. The maintenance team said it needed a part that wouldn't arrive until next week. 2 engineers tried this morning and couldn't figure it out. Sometimes things just need a gentle touch," Elijah said, already wheeling his cart away. "Thank you," Zoe called after him, her voice carrying genuine appreciation. That evening, after most employees had departed, Elijah remained. This was his favorite time, when the fluorescent glare softened into the dim glow of security lighting, when he could move through the building without becoming invisible. He made his way to the R&D lab on the 26th floor. Officially, he wasn't permitted entry during business hours, something about confidentiality agreements and security protocols. But the night guard, Thomas, had long ago stopped questioning Elijah's after-hours presence. "Just need to check the HVAC vents," Elijah would say, and Thomas would nod. Inside the lab, Elijah moved with reverence among the half-assembled prototypes and blinking monitors. He straightened tools left carelessly on workbenches, tidied diagrams scattered across desks. His hands lingered on a partially assembled circuit board, his eyes tracing the patterns with the familiarity of an old friend. From his pocket, he withdrew a worn leather notebook. Its pages were filled with precise sketches and mathematical formulas, generations more advanced than the work currently displayed on the lab's screens. He made a few notes, comparing what he saw with his own calculations. The next morning, Zoe began asking questions about Elijah. She approached Dana in HR first, the janitor who fixed the elevator. "What's his story?" Dana barely looked up from her computer. "Elijah? Been here about 5 years, I think. Keeps to himself. Why?" "Just curious. He fixed something in seconds that had everyone else stumped." Dana shrugged. "He's reliable. That's about all I know." Zoe tried the security team next, catching Bill during his coffee break. "Elijah? Good man," Bill said. "Always. On time, never causes trouble. Makes the best cornbread you've ever tasted. Brings it in every Christmas. Does anyone know anything about his background? Before Langston?" Bill thought for a moment. "Don't think he talks about that much. Just the janitor, you know. Does his job, goes home." But Zoe couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Elijah Hayes than met the eye. Friday morning arrived, with unexpected drama. Clayton Riker's custom prototype vehicle, a sleek silver machine that reportedly cost more than most employees' annual salaries, refused to start. It sat in the executive parking space, hood open, surrounded by a cluster of nervous engineers. Clayton paced beside it, his face flushed with anger. "Are you telling me that none of you can figure out what's wrong with a car that you designed?" "Sir, the diagnostic system is showing multiple errors," one engineer explained timidly. "We need to get it back to the lab to—" "It's garbage, Clayton. erupted, kicking the front tire. 3 years of development, and it can't even start reliably. Elijah was sweeping the sidewalk nearby, watching the scene unfold with quiet interest. The car was Langston's prototype self-learning electric vehicle, the company's most ambitious project to date. The same one being discussed in the meeting he'd overheard. Clayton noticed Elijah's gaze and a cruel smile twisted his lips. "Hey, genius," he called out, his voice dripping with mockery. "You think you can do better than my engineers? Fix this, and the car's yours." Laughter rippled through the gathered crowd. Someone snickered. "Right, like the janitor's gonna solve it." Elijah stood still for a moment, his broom clutched in weathered hands. Then, with deliberate calm, he propped it against a planter and approached the vehicle. The engineers parted uncertainly. Clayton folded his arms, his expression smug. Elijah leaned over the exposed engine compartment, his eyes scanning the complex array of components. His fingers traced wiring paths with the confidence of intimate knowledge. He tapped twice on a junction box, adjusted 2 wires that had been improperly secured, and stepped back. "Try it now," he said quietly. Clayton rolled his eyes but pressed the ignition button on the key fob. The car hummed to life immediately, its display lighting up with a healthy green glow. Silence fell over the parking lot. Every face registered shock, none more so than Clayton's, whose laughter had died in his throat. For several seconds, no one moved. The gentle hum of the electric engine was the only sound in the stunned silence of the parking lot. Clayton's face cycled through expressions: surprise, confusion, embarrassment, and finally, forced dismissal. "Lucky guess," he muttered, quickly closing the hood. "Must have been a loose connection or something simple." The engineers exchanged glances, knowing it had been anything but simple. The diagnostic system had shown multiple critical errors, problems that should have required hours of troubleshooting. Elijah simply nodded and returned to his broom. "Just needed the right touch," he said, resuming his sweeping as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had shifted. As the crowd dispersed, several engineers looked back at Elijah with new curiosity. Zoe, who had witnessed the entire incident from the building entrance, had her phone discreetly pointed toward the scene. By lunchtime, whispers had spread throughout Langston Innovations. In the cafeteria, groups huddled together, glancing occasionally at Elijah as he quietly cleaned tables in the corner. "Did you hear what happened in the parking lot? No way the janitor just magically fixed the prototype." Clayton looked like he'd seen a ghost. 2 days later, the video appeared on TikTok. Zoe had shared it in a private chat with friends, but someone had posted it publicly. The caption read, "Janitor fixes CEO's $3 million prototype like it's a toaster." Within hours, it had been viewed 50,000 times. By the end of the day, it had crossed to LinkedIn, where tech professionals shared it with comments like, "Hidden talent is everywhere," and "This is why you respect all your employees." On Monday morning, Elijah arrived to find the atmosphere at Langston noticeably different. People who had never acknowledged him before nodded hello. A few engineers smiled nervously as he passed. In the elevator, a software developer actually introduced herself. "I'm Amanda," she said, extending her hand. "That was pretty impressive what you did with the prototype." Elijah shook her hand with a small smile. "Just a simple fix." "Simple? We've had 3 engineers working on that issue for weeks." Before Elijah could respond, the elevator stopped at the 18th floor. As Amanda exited, she turned back. "Where did you learn to do that kind of work?" The doors closed before he needed to answer. At 11 o'clock, Elijah received a text message from Dana in HR. "Need to see you in my office ASAP." When he arrived, Dana wasn't alone. James Porter, the company's head of security, sat beside her desk with a stern expression. "Please sit down, Elijah," Dana said, her tone professionally neutral. James pushed a document across the desk. "We need to discuss an incident from last Thursday evening. Security footage shows you entering the R&D lab after hours." Elijah glanced at the paper, a formal warning notice. "The R&D areas are restricted access," James continued. "Your clearance only covers common areas and offices." "I was checking the ventilation system," Elijah said quietly. "That's facilities management's job, not janitorial," Dana replied. Your contract specifically outlines your permitted areas. R&D isn't one of them. Elijah looked between them, then signed the warning without protest. As he stood to leave, he said simply, "Understood." But the look in his eyes carried a quiet defiance that neither Dana nor James could miss. Meanwhile, Zoe had become increasingly intrigued by the mystery of Elijah Hayes. Her initial curiosity had blossomed into a full investigation. Between classes at Northwestern University, where she was completing her master's in electrical engineering, she searched online archives and academic databases. At first, she found nothing. No social media presence, no professional profiles. Then she tried academic journals, searching for engineering publications. And there it was, a paper from 1992 titled Adaptive Learning Algorithms in Automotive Navigation Systems by Elijah J. Hayes, MIT. Further searches revealed more publications, patents, and conference presentations, all from the late 1980s through the late 1990s. Then, abruptly, nothing. Elijah Hayes had simply vanished from the academic and professional world around 2002. A newspaper article from 2001 provided a clue. Whistleblower claims AI safety concerns ignored at Tech Dynamics. The article mentioned an engineer who had raised alarms about flawed AI systems being rushed to market. The engineer wasn't named, but the timeline matched Elijah's disappearance from professional circles. That afternoon, Zoe found Elijah cleaning windows in the lobby. She approached cautiously, aware that her discoveries might be unwelcome. "Mr. Hayes," she began, "can I talk to you for a minute? Privately?" Elijah paused, studying her face. "Something wrong with the elevators again?" "No, it's about, MIT and Tech Dynamics." His expression hardened slightly, but he nodded toward a quiet corner of the lobby. Once they were away from passing ears, Zoe spoke softly. "You were a mechanical engineer. You taught at MIT. You published papers on adaptive learning systems 20 years before anyone else was thinking about them." Elijah remained silent, his eyes focused on the window cleaner in his hand. "What happened?" Zoe pressed. "Why are you here, cleaning floors, when you could be leading the R&D department?" Elijah finished with a sad smile. "Life takes turns, Ms. Mitchell." "Zoe, please," Elijah sighed, seeming to make a decision. "My younger brother Marcus worked at Tech Dynamics. He was testing a new AI guidance system, something I had expressed concerns about. The safeguards weren't adequate." He paused, the pain still evident. "After all these years, there was an accident. Marcus didn't make it. I went public with my concerns about the technology, showed how corners had been cut to meet deadlines. And they blackballed you," Zoe guessed. Elijah nodded. 20 years ago, loyalty to companies mattered more than safety. I couldn't get hired anywhere in the industry. Eventually, I stopped trying, started taking whatever jobs I could find. But why here, at a tech company? A faint smile crossed his face. "I still love the work, even if I'm just watching from the sidelines." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the reception desk. Clayton Riker was storming through the lobby, his face like thunder. Behind him, 2 IT staff members hurried to keep pace. "I want that video gone," Clayton was saying. "Every copy, every share, every trace of it. Is that clear?" He stopped short when he spotted Elijah and Zoe. His eyes narrowed. "You," he pointed at Elijah. "My office, now." 15 minutes later, Elijah stood before Clayton's vast desk on the 40th floor. The office offered panoramic views of Chicago, but Clayton's attention was firmly on the janitor before him. "That video has been viewed over 1 million times," Clayton said, his voice tight with controlled fury. "The board has been calling me all weekend." Elijah remained silent. "They want to know why a janitor can fix problems that our engineering team can't solve. They're questioning my leadership, my talent management." Clayton leaned forward. "So tell me, Hayes, who the hell are you really?" "Just a man doing his job, sir." Clayton's laugh was sharp and humorless. "No, I looked into your background after that stunt with the car. You're not just anything." He stood, circling the desk to stand uncomfortably close to Elijah. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to fix one more problem for me. A real one. There's a core algorithm in our self-learning vehicle that's been stalling development for months. Fix it and I'll triple your pay." The sneer in Clayton's voice made clear he believed Elijah would fail, that the car had been a fluke, a lucky guess that couldn't be repeated. Elijah considered for a long moment. I'll need the schematics. The real ones, not the simplified versions your team uses for presentations. Clayton blinked, surprised by the confidence in Elijah's voice. And I want Zoe in the room, Elijah added. The intern? Why? She asks good questions. Clayton's eyes narrowed, but he nodded curtly. Fine. Tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., main R&D lab. You'll have the schematics and your assistant. His tone suggested he was humoring a delusional request. But when you fail, you go back to mopping floors and stay there. No more viral videos, no more playing engineer. Elijah nodded once. Understood. As he turned to leave, Clayton called after him. One more thing, Hayes. The board is watching this now. Don't embarrass me again. Back in the maintenance closet that served as his break room, Elijah sat alone, his worn notebook open before him. The pages contained designs and algorithms far beyond what was currently in Langston's prototype, ideas he'd developed years ago, but never had the chance to implement. Tomorrow would be his first time back in a proper engineering environment in almost 2 decades. The thought filled him with both anticipation and dread. His phone buzzed with a text from Zoe. Just heard about tomorrow, what's the plan? Elijah smiled slightly as he typed his reply. Time to remember who I was. That evening, after the building had emptied, Elijah stood in the parking garage looking at the silver prototype vehicle that had changed everything. His reflection was distorted in its gleaming surface. A man caught between worlds, between identities. For 20 years, he had been invisible. Tomorrow, for better or worse, people would see him again. As Elijah turned to leave, his phone buzzed with a notification. The viral video had just hit 5 million views. Morning light filtered through the glass walls of Langston Innovations R&D lab as Elijah Hayes entered for the first time during working hours. Unlike his nighttime visits, the space now hummed with activity. Engineers hunched over workstations, screens displaying complex simulations, and the low murmur of technical discussions. As Elijah stepped through the doorway, conversations faltered. Heads turned. The Navy maintenance uniform he still wore stood in stark contrast to the casual business attire and lab coats around him. Zoe waited near the main conference table, her smile encouraging despite the tension in the room. She'd arrived early to prepare, setting up a dedicated workstation for their use. Morning, Mr. Hayes, she said, loudly enough for others to hear the respect in her voice. Just Elijah is fine, he replied quietly. A tall engineer with graying, temples approached, hand extended. Dr. Hayes? I'm Wilson Gardner. I read your paper on predictive algorithmic patterns back in grad school. It changed my entire approach to programming. Before Elijah could respond, Clayton strode in, flanked by 2 executives. His expression made clear he hadn't expected this reception. Let's get started, Clayton announced sharply. I don't have all day for this experiment. Wilson retreated, but not before giving Elijah a nod of respect. On the conference table lay several tablets and a stack of printed schematics. Clayton gestured impatiently. The algorithm in question relates to our vehicle's self-learning capabilities, specifically the decision-making protocols during unexpected road conditions. His tone carried the implication that these concepts would be beyond Elijah's understanding. Elijah picked up the top schematic, his eyes scanning the diagrams with practiced efficiency. 25 years might have passed since he'd worked in a proper lab, but the language of engineering remained fluent to him. You've got a recursion problem, he said after several minutes of silence. Clayton snorted. Yes, we're aware. That's what you're supposedly here to fix. Elijah spread out 3 schematics side by side. It's not just recursion. Your system is creating data loops that feed back into the decision matrix without proper filtering. At high speeds, this would cause the vehicle to... He paused, looking up at Clayton. To lose control, possibly catastrophically. A murmur rippled through the gathered engineers. One of them, a younger man with a Stanford sweatshirt, whispered loudly to his colleague, "That's exactly what I've been saying for months." Clayton's face flushed. "We know the theoretical risks. What we need is a solution, not more problem identification." Elijah nodded calmly. "May I?" he asked Zoe, gesturing to the computer workstation. For the next hour, Elijah worked methodically, explaining his process to Zoe as his fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising dexterity for a man who supposedly spent his days pushing a mop. "See here?" he said, pointing to a section of code. "They've overcomplicated the safety protocols. Sometimes the simplest approach is best. A small delay in the feedback loop creates time for proper data validation." Zoe absorbed every word, occasionally asking questions that revealed her own sharp intellect. "So instead of trying to process everything simultaneously, you're creating a priority hierarchy?" "Exactly." Elijah smiled, a flash of the professor he once was breaking through. "In critical systems, you don't need to solve every problem at once. You need to solve the right problems in the right order." The younger engineers began to drift closer, drawn by the clear, practical wisdom in Elijah's explanations. Even those who had initially looked skeptical were now taking notes. Clayton noticed the growing audience and frowned. He stepped forward, deliberately interrupting. "While this classroom session is touching, we have actual work to complete." Elijah didn't rise to the bait. "Ms. Mitchell is learning quickly. She has good instincts." He turned to Zoe. "Trust those instincts even when the room tells you you're wrong, especially then." As they continued working, Elijah occasionally paused, his gaze distant. During one such moment, Zoe gently asked, "Remembering MIT?" Elijah nodded. "Different time. Different world." He opened his worn notebook, showing her hand-drawn diagrams from decades earlier. "I was working on adaptive learning systems when most people thought AI just meant robots in science fiction movies." The diagrams in his notebook showed concepts, remarkably similar to what Langston was now developing, except Elijah's designs were cleaner, more elegant, with safety protocols integrated at every level. "You were decades ahead of everyone," Zoe said, wonder in her voice, "and look where it got me." Elijah's smile held no bitterness, only a quiet acceptance. Near noon, Clayton returned with the chief technology officer, a nervous-looking man named Paul Wilson. They huddled in the corner, speaking in hushed tones while glancing frequently at Elijah. Zoe's phone buzzed with a message from a friend in IT. "Heads up, Riker just restricted Hayes' system access, told us to limit his permissions to read-only, on most modules." She showed the message to Elijah, who simply nodded. "Expected that." "But how will you fix anything without full access?" Elijah's eyes crinkled. "Sometimes limitations foster creativity." He reached for a blank sheet of paper. "Before computers, we designed systems with pencil and paper. Let's go old school." Over the next 3 hours, Elijah sketched out an alternative approach to the algorithm, using only the printed circuit diagrams and basic simulation tools Clayton hadn't thought to restrict. Where the engineering team had been adding layers of complexity to solve the recursion problem, Elijah stripped everything back to fundamentals. "The elegance is in simplicity," he told Zoe. "They're trying to anticipate every possible scenario. That's impossible. Instead, create a system that can learn and adapt safely." By mid-afternoon, Elijah had outlined a complete solution, one that not only fixed the recursion issue, but optimized the entire decision-making framework with a single, brilliant line of code modification. "Ready to test?" he asked Zoe. She nodded, excitement visible despite her professional demeanor. Clayton had arranged for the simulation to be run on the main lab display, clearly anticipating a public failure. Engineers gathered around as Zoe loaded Elijah's solution into the test environment. The simulation began, a virtual version of the prototype vehicle navigating increasingly complex road conditions. Where previous tests had shown the AI hesitating dangerously or overcompensating, Elijah's version moved with fluid confidence, making decisions that seemed almost human in their intuitive correctness. When the final test, an emergency obstacle, avoidance scenario that had consistently crashed the system before, completed successfully, spontaneous applause broke out in the lab. "He did it," Wilson Gardner said, shaking his head in amazement. "One day. It took him 1 day." Clayton's face was a study in conflicting emotions, relief that the problem was solved warring with fury that Elijah had succeeded where his team had failed. He forced a tight smile. "Promising initial results. We'll need extensive validation. Of course. As the excitement continued, Zoe slipped away to refill her coffee. In the break room, she overheard two IT technicians discussing an email they'd just received. Riker wants the access logs for Hayes' session today. Specifically asked us to document if he accessed anything beyond the test environment. Why? The guy just saved the project. Above my pay grade, man. I just know Riker's email said don't give him full access, let him fail. Seems like the boss was counting on that. Zoe returned to the lab, anger simmering beneath her professional exterior. She found Clayton congratulating the engineering team on collaborative problem solving, with no mention of Elijah's contribution. Mr. Riker, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. A word? Clayton followed her to a quiet corner, his expression impatient. What is it, intern? I'm in the middle of something. I know you deliberately restricted Mr. Hayes' access. You wanted him to fail. Clayton's face hardened. Be very careful, Ms. Mitchell. You're making serious accusations against your CEO. I have the email, sir. For a moment, genuine alarm flashed across Clayton's features before he regained his composure. You'd do well to remember your place. In this company, temporary interns don't typically have promising careers after challenging executives. He turned away, but Zoe wasn't finished. He fixed your algorithm anyway, with pencil and paper. What does that tell you about who really belongs here? Meanwhile, Elijah was speaking with several engineers who were eagerly asking about his approach. The atmosphere had transformed. No longer was he the invisible janitor, but a colleague whose insights they valued. When Zoe told him about Clayton's sabotage, something shifted in Elijah's eyes. The patient acceptance gave way to a quiet dignity, tinged with disappointment. I think I'm done here, he said softly. What? But you solved it. Everyone can see what you're capable of now. Elijah shook his head. They don't want me here, Zoe. Not really. He gathered his notebook and the few personal items he'd brought. I was never really back, was I? Before Zoe could respond, Elijah walked toward the exit. Engineers tried to stop him to ask questions, to understand what was happening, but he moved past them with polite determination. As he stepped into the elevator, Wilson Gardner called out, Dr. Hayes, where are you going? Elijah offered a small smile. Just Elijah is fine, and I'm going home. The doors closed, leaving the R&D lab in confused silence. That evening, the Langston Innovations Board of Directors held an emergency meeting. The success of Elijah's solution had rippled upward, along with troubling reports about Clayton's behavior. By morning, a formal apology had been drafted, along with an offer for Elijah to join the engineering team in an official capacity. But when security went to deliver the letter to Elijah's locker, they found it empty. His uniform hung neatly, his ID badge placed carefully on the shelf. Elijah Hayes had disappeared again. 3 days passed with no sign of Elijah. His small apartment in South Chicago remained empty, mail accumulating in the box. At Langston Innovations, his absence created a void larger than anyone would have expected for a maintenance worker. Zoe Mitchell, however, wasn't accepting Elijah's disappearance. She'd spent 2 days gathering documentation, access logs, email, threads, simulation results, building a comprehensive record of both Elijah's contribution and Clayton's attempted sabotage. On Wednesday morning, she made a decision that would change everything. Using her access to the development environment, Zoe created a public demonstration version of the vehicle's navigation system, a simplified but functional replica of what Elijah had fixed. At exactly noon, when the company cafeteria was at its busiest, she launched a live stream from her personal account. My name is Zoe Mitchell, engineering intern at Langston Innovations, she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. 3 days ago, a man named Elijah Hayes solved a critical algorithm problem that our engineering team had struggled with for months. I'm going to show you his solution in action. For the next 15 minutes, Zoe methodically demonstrated the before and after of Elijah's fix, explaining in accessible terms why his approach was revolutionary. She never directly accused Clayton of sabotage, but the evidence she presented spoke volumes. This man wasn't an executive or even an engineer at Langston, she concluded. He was our janitor, and now he's gone because some people would rather bury genius than admit they didn't see it. The live stream ended, but its impact was just beginning. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times. Tech blogs picked up the story, framing it as a modern David and Goliath tale. Headlines emerged across digital media. CEO tries to bury janitor's genius fix. Black maintenance worker solves unsolvable tech problem. The janitor who outsmarted Silicon Valley. By evening, it had reached mainstream news outlets. Financial analysts began questioning Langston Innovations' leadership. Investors called emergency meetings. The company's stock dropped 8% in after-hours trading. Clayton Riker's sleek corner office had become a crisis center. His assistant fielded nonstop calls while Clayton himself was locked in a video conference with increasingly hostile board members. "This is a PR disaster, Clayton," said Margaret Baker, head of the board. "We've got 3 major investors threatening to pull out." "It's being blown completely out of proportion," Clayton insisted. "He fixed one algorithm, and now he's being portrayed as some kind of misunderstood genius." "Because he is," another board member interjected. "I've had 4 different engineering professors contact me today confirming that Hayes was a pioneer in adaptive systems. One called him the most innovative mind of his generation." Margaret's voice hardened. "The board is calling a vote of no confidence, Clayton. I suggest you prepare a statement." As Clayton's world unraveled, Elijah sat in his modest living room, watching the storm unfold on his aging television. He'd finally returned home late the previous night, after spending days with his nephew Jameer in Milwaukee. The sudden attention made him deeply uncomfortable, the very opposite of the quiet life he'd built for himself. His phone had accumulated dozens of messages. Most he ignored, but one text from Zoe caught his attention. "I'm sorry if I made things worse, but you deserve recognition, and they deserved accountability." Elijah was composing a reply when a knock came at his door. Outside stood a courier with an envelope bearing an unfamiliar corporate logo, Vector Dynamics, a rising tech firm based in San Francisco. The letter inside was brief but intriguing, an invitation to speak at the upcoming West Coast Tech Summit as a featured innovator. All expenses paid, no obligations beyond sharing his story and insights. Elijah placed the letter on his coffee table, uncertain. Public speaking had never been his strength, even in his teaching days. And after 20 years of invisibility, the thought of standing before an audience of tech leaders was daunting. His contemplation was interrupted by another knock. This time, when he opened the door, no one was there, only a small, elegant box with a note attached. "A promise is a promise. Langston Board." Heart racing, Elijah walked outside. Parked at the curb was the silver prototype vehicle, the same one he'd fixed in the parking lot that fateful morning. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, murmuring in appreciation of the sleek machine that seemed utterly out of place in their working-class neighborhood. Elijah's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a woman's voice greeted him. "Mr. Hayes? Margaret Baker, chairwoman of Langston Innovations. I hope our gift arrived safely." "It did," Elijah replied, still processing the reality of a multi-million-dollar vehicle now apparently belonging to him. "Consider it the first installment of our apology," Margaret continued. "The board would also like to discuss compensation for your algorithm solution, and if you're willing, a more formal relationship moving forward." "I appreciate that, Ms. Baker, but I'm not sure I'm looking to rejoin corporate America." "I understand, but perhaps you'd consider consulting on your own terms. The door is open whenever you're ready." After ending the call, Elijah stood beside the gleaming car, its surface reflecting the modest homes of his neighborhood. The contrast wasn't lost on him, or on the children gathering to admire the vehicle. "That really yours, Mr. Hayes?" asked Danny, a 12-year-old from down the block. "Apparently so," Elijah replied with a small smile. "How'd you get it?" Elijah considered the question. "By fixing something others couldn't." 2 weeks later, Elijah found himself in a sleek San Francisco hotel, preparing for his keynote address at the West Coast Tech Summit. The invitation had come from Catherine Barnes, CEO of Vector Dynamics and a longtime rival of Clayton Riker, a fact Zoe had discovered and shared with Elijah before he accepted. "She's using you to embarrass Clayton," Zoe had warned during one of their daily calls. "Probably," Elijah had agreed, "but she's also giving me a platform. I might as well use it." Now, standing backstage as the host introduced him, Elijah felt a strange calm. The auditorium was packed with tech executives, engineers, and media, all eager to hear from the janitor who had outsmarted Silicon Valley. When he stepped onto the stage, the applause was deafening. Elijah waited for it to subside, then spoke simply and directly. 20 years ago, I lost everything for speaking the truth about unsafe technology. Today, I'm here because the truth found its way out anyway. For the next 30 minutes, Elijah told his story, not with bitterness or anger, but with the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen the industry from both the highest heights and the humblest positions. The mind doesn't age, he said toward the end of his talk. It doesn't care what uniform you wear or what title you hold. It just needs someone to believe in it again. The standing ovation lasted nearly 5 minutes. Back at Langston Innovations, the atmosphere had transformed. Clayton Riker had been placed on administrative leave pending a board investigation, with rumors of forced resignation circulating throughout the company. Zoe had been offered a permanent position in the R&D department, with a specific mandate to build a mentorship program for non-traditional talent. Her first official act was to create a recruitment initiative targeting maintenance and support staff across the company. Everyone deserves to be seen, she told the HR team during the planning meeting. Elijah Hayes isn't the only hidden genius out there. The program, which she named Beyond the Badge, quickly gained support from engineers who had witnessed Elijah's brilliance firsthand. Wilson Gardner volunteered to teach technical workshops designed for employees without formal engineering backgrounds. As the initiative took shape, Zoe received unexpected support from Margaret Baker and the board. The PR disaster of Elijah's treatment had evolved into an opportunity to reshape Langston's culture and its public image. The day after Elijah's keynote speech went viral, Clayton Riker was formally asked to resign. The board cited leadership failures and ethical concerns in their public statement. Privately, they had presented him with evidence of his attempted sabotage and discriminatory practices that extended far beyond his treatment of Elijah. With Clayton gone, the board faced a critical decision about his replacement. After several closed-door meetings, they made an unexpected choice. Rather than bringing in an outside executive, they promoted from within, selecting Dr. Lisa Harmon, a respected engineering director with a reputation for ethical leadership. In San Francisco, Elijah was fielding job offers from nearly every major tech company. Vector Dynamics had made the most aggressive play, offering him the role of chief technology officer with compensation that would have been unimaginable weeks earlier. Yet as tempting as these opportunities were, Elijah found himself hesitating. The corporate world that had once rejected him now desperately wanted him back. But on their terms, in their environment. On his last evening in San Francisco, Elijah sat on his hotel balcony overlooking the bay, talking with Zoe on the phone. They offered me the CTO position, he told her. Full creative control, a team of 50 engineers, stock options worth millions. That's amazing, Zoe replied. Are you going to take it? Elijah watched the sunset paint the water golden. I've done the 100-hour weeks, the corporate politics, the endless meetings. I'm not sure I want to go back to that life. So what do you want? The question hung in the air as Elijah considered his answer. I want to build things at my own pace, things that matter. Langston offered me a permanent R&D position, Zoe said after a moment. They're also asking if you'd consider coming back as a consultant. No title, no politics, just working on problems that interest you. Elijah smiled. Sounds tempting. Let me think about it. After ending the call, Elijah picked up the key fob to the prototype vehicle, which he'd had shipped to San Francisco for his visit. The car represented everything that had changed in his life. A symbol of recognition long denied, of value finally seen. The next morning, instead of heading to the airport for his return flight, Elijah climbed into the sleek silver car. He programmed the navigation system to his old neighborhood in Chicago, not the route, just the destination. Then he engaged the autonomous driving system he had helped perfect. Let's go home, he said quietly. As the vehicle pulled smoothly into traffic, Elijah couldn't help but smile at the irony. 20 years spent invisible, and now his work would be seen by millions, guiding them safely home without them ever knowing his name. The car hummed beneath him, its AI making thousands, of decisions each second using algorithms he had refined with pencil and paper. Outside, San Francisco slipped away as the vehicle merged onto the eastbound highway. Elijah Hayes was going home, not to hide, but to build something new on his own terms. The journey home took Elijah 4 days. He could have made it in 2, but he chose the scenic route, stopping in small towns and taking detours to national parks he'd always meant to visit. The prototype vehicle performed flawlessly, its AI navigation system learning his preferences with each mile. Chicago greeted him with its familiar skyline, the afternoon sun glinting off Lake Michigan as he crossed into the city limits. Rather than heading directly to his apartment, Elijah found himself driving to the cemetery where his brother Marcus was buried. The modest headstone read simply, Marcus Hayes, 1972-2001. Beloved brother, brilliant mind. Elijah knelt beside it, brushing away fallen leaves. You wouldn't believe the month I've had, Marcus, he said softly. People are listening again. Later that evening, in his small apartment, Elijah sat surrounded by stacks of old journals and technical papers, artifacts from his previous life that he'd kept stored in boxes beneath his bed. For the first time in nearly 2 decades, he allowed himself to revisit the work that had once defined him. His phone chimed with a text from Zoe. How was the drive? Office feels weird without you fixing things. Elijah smiled as he replied. Drive was good. Getting reacquainted with old ideas. How's the new job? Challenging. Board approved my mentorship program. When are you coming in to consult? He hadn't given Langston a definitive answer about the consulting role. Part of him was still hesitant to step back into that world, even on his own terms. Before he could reply, another notification appeared. An email from an address he hadn't seen in over 20 years. Nathan.Kessler@vectorsystems.com. The subject. Line read simply, Overdue apology. Elijah's hand trembled slightly as he opened it. Nathan Kessler had been his most promising student at MIT, later his colleague at Tech Dynamics, and ultimately one of the voices that had testified against him during the whistleblowing investigation. Elijah, the email began. I saw your speech at the summit. 20 years too late, but I need to tell you that you were right, and I was a coward. I've carried the shame of my betrayal for 2 decades. I'm in Chicago next week. If you're willing, I'd like to meet. No agenda, just an old student owing his mentor the truth. The message ended with Nathan's contact information and a simple closing. I understand if you delete this. Elijah sat back, memories flooding through him. Nathan had been brilliant, perhaps the most talented engineer Elijah had ever taught. They had worked side by side developing early AI systems, sharing a vision of technology that would genuinely improve human lives. Then came the military drone contract. Elijah had identified critical safety flaws in the guidance systems, flaws that could lead to catastrophic civilian casualties. When he'd raised concerns, the company pressured everyone to sign off on the system anyway. Nathan, young and afraid for his future, had not only signed but testified that Elijah's concerns were theoretical and excessive. 3 days later, Elijah agreed to meet Nathan at a small cafe in Lincoln Park, away from the downtown tech corridor where they might be recognized. Nathan had aged well, his hair now silver at the temples, his face lined but distinguished. He stood when Elijah entered, his expression a complex mixture of shame and relief. You look well, Nathan said after an awkward handshake. 20 years of physical labor keeps you fit, Elijah replied without rancor. They ordered coffee and, for several minutes, neither spoke. Finally, Nathan broke the silence. I was 28. Terrified of losing my first real job and convinced by people I thought were smarter about business that you were overreacting. He stared into his cup. I was wrong. They were wrong. And people died because of it. Elijah studied the man before him. Why now, Nathan? My story's been public for weeks. You could have reached out sooner. Honestly? I've drafted emails to you every year on the anniversary of the hearing. Never sent them. Nathan met his eyes. Seeing you on that stage, speaking with the same integrity you had back then, it broke something in me. I couldn't hide from it anymore. He placed a business card on the table. I'm Executive Vice President of Research at Vector Systems now. I have authority, resources. He paused. I want to make you an offer. Senior technical advisor. Your own lab, your own team. Complete autonomy. Elijah picked up the card, turning it over in his fingers. That's quite a step up from janitor. It's not charity, Nathan insisted. It's self-interest. You were 20 years ahead of everyone back then. I can only imagine what you've been thinking about while the rest of us were playing catch-up. Before Elijah could respond, his phone buzzed with a call from Zoe. He excused himself to answer. Hey, I was just checking in, she said. But you sound busy. Having coffee with Nathan Kessler, Elijah replied quietly. A pause. From Vector Systems? Elijah, be careful. I've been researching them for the mentorship program. They have a reputation for questionable ethics, industrial espionage, predatory acquisitions, environmental violations. That's so. Elijah glanced at Nathan, who was checking his own phone. They're trying to rebuild their image. Your name would help with that. Her voice grew concerned. They're not who you want to align with for your comeback. After ending the, call, Elijah returned to the table with a thoughtful expression. Problem? Nathan asked. Just some information about Vector Systems I wasn't aware of. Elijah set the business card down. Nathan, why does a company with your track record want someone like me? Someone who's known for prioritizing ethics over profit. Nathan's expression tightened briefly before settling into a practiced smile. Every company has critics. We're trying to change course. Having someone of your moral standing would help us do that. So I'd be a reputation laundromat. I prefer to think of it as bringing our practices in line with our potential. Nathan leaned forward. Elijah, you could have real impact. Significant compensation, the recognition you've deserved for decades. Elijah considered the offer, turning it over in his mind like one of the complex problems he used to solve. It was tempting. The resources, the platform, the validation. Yet something felt wrong, like a misaligned circuit in an otherwise perfect design. I need time to think about it, he finally said. Nathan nodded, seemingly satisfied. Take all the time you need. The offer won't expire. The following day, rather than heading to Langston or returning Nathan's follow-up message, Elijah drove to MIT. He hadn't set foot on campus since his abrupt departure 20 years earlier, and he half expected to be recognized or stopped. Instead, he found himself just another visitor, anonymous among the crowds of students and faculty. The engineering building had been renovated, but the bones remained the same. Elijah slipped into the back of a lecture hall where a class was in progress, a discussion on adaptive learning systems in transportation technology. The fundamental challenge, the professor was saying, is creating AI that can make human-like judgments without human-like hesitation. Elijah smiled to himself. He'd written nearly identical words in a paper in 1994. As students presented their projects, Elijah felt a bittersweet pride. These young minds were building on foundations he had helped lay, exploring questions he had first formulated decades ago. They would never know who he was, sitting quietly in the back row. But in some small way, his work lived on through theirs. After the lecture, Elijah wandered the halls, eventually finding himself in the robotics lab. A janitor was mopping nearby, keys jangling at his belt just as Elijah's once had at Langston. Mind if I look around? Elijah asked. The man shrugged. Just don't touch nothing. They get particular about their robots. Elijah thanked him and drifted through the lab, examining projects in various stages of completion. In the corner, a student team was working on a small self-navigating vehicle, not unlike a miniature version of Langston's prototype. Excuse me, one student called out, noticing Elijah studying their work. Are you a professor? No, Elijah said with a small smile. Just someone interested in your project. The student, eager to share, launched into an explanation of their navigation system. Elijah listened, asking occasional questions that revealed more understanding than the average visitor. By the end of the conversation, 3 more students had joined them, all excited by Elijah's insights. You really know this stuff, one commented. Do you work in the field? I used to, Elijah replied simply. As he drove home that evening, Elijah felt a sense of purpose he hadn't experienced in years. The student's enthusiasm had rekindled something in him. Not ambition exactly, but a reminder of why he had loved engineering in the first place. The pure joy of solving problems that, mattered. His next stop was Milwaukee, where his nephew Jameer was finishing his senior year of high school. The boy had Marcus's eyes and the same quick mind that seemed to run in the Hayes family. "Everyone at school's talking about you, Uncle Elijah," Jameer said as they sat in a local diner. "They're saying you're some kind of genius who's been hiding all this time." Elijah shook his head, embarrassed. "Just a man who knew how to fix something. The engineering forums are full of people analyzing your code. They talk about you like you're a ghost or something." Jameer leaned forward, voice lowering, conspiratorially. "One of my teachers pulled me aside to ask if you were really my uncle." "What did you tell him?" "That you taught me how to rebuild an engine when I was 10, and that you're the smartest person I know." Jameer grinned. "But I didn't tell him you're the reason I applied to engineering programs." Elijah felt a lump in his throat. "You got in somewhere good?" Jameer slid an envelope across the table. Inside was an acceptance letter from MIT, the same program where Elijah had once taught. "I was going to keep it a surprise, but then you got famous." Elijah read the letter twice, pride swelling in his chest. "Your father would have been so proud." "Jameer, I know." The young man's eyes grew serious. "That's why I need to ask you something. All these companies wanting to hire you now, are you going to take any of those offers?" "I'm considering it." "Why?" "Because you're not just building machines, Uncle Elijah. You're building a legacy." Jameer tapped the MIT letter. "The way I see it, you've got a second chance to do things right, to build things that help people without compromising." When Elijah returned to Chicago, he found a formal letter waiting in his mailbox. Langston Innovations Board was requesting his consultation on their upcoming public release of the self-learning vehicle. "We'd like you to be the face of innovation," the note read, signed by Margaret Baker herself. Unlike Nathan's offer, this one included full creative control over the technical aspects of the project, not just a name to be used for publicity. A second letter arrived the next day, this one from Zoe, with details about the diversity-led tech incubator she was creating. She'd named it Hayes Labs and wanted Elijah to mentor the first class of participants. "It's not about titles," she wrote. "It's about building something that matters." Sitting in his small living room that evening, surrounded by the remnants of his past and possibilities for his future, Elijah made his decision. He called Nathan first. "I appreciate the offer," he said, "but I have to decline." "May I ask why?" Nathan's disappointment was evident. "Because 20 years ago I chose principles over position. I'm not changing that now." Next he called Margaret at Langston, accepting their consulting offer with one condition. "Zoe runs R&D and I'll remain an advisor. No titles, no politics." Margaret agreed immediately. Finally, he texted Jameer. "Decided to help build something that matters, starting with helping the next generation of engineers like you." 6 weeks after Elijah's return to Langston Innovations as a consultant, rumors began circulating through Chicago's tech community. Clayton Riker had landed on his feet. After his forced resignation, he'd maintained a low profile, until Vector Systems announced his appointment as their new chief strategy officer. "Did you see this?" Zoe asked, showing Elijah the press release on her tablet as they reviewed designs in the R&D lab. Elijah nodded, unsurprised. Nathan always did know how to capitalize on opportunities. "There's more." Zoe scrolled down. "They've hired 6 former Langston engineers in the past month, all from our AI vehicle team." Elijah frowned. The pattern was too deliberate to be coincidence. "They're building a competing program with our people who have knowledge of our systems." Before they could discuss further, Wilson Gardner rushed in, his normally calm demeanor visibly shaken. "We've had a breach," he announced. "Someone accessed the secure server containing the core algorithm designs. IT is still assessing the damage, but it looks targeted. Only files related to the self-learning vehicle were accessed." Elijah's expression darkened. "When?" "Last night between 2 and 4 a.m. The access originated from inside the building." Zoe and Elijah exchanged glances. "Who was here at that hour?" she asked. "Security logs show a maintenance team doing standard HVAC work. They had proper clearance." Wilson ran a hand through his hair. "But something doesn't add up. The server access used high-level authentication protocols." Elijah opened his laptop, fingers moving rapidly across the keyboard. "Let me see the intrusion pattern." Wilson sent him the logs, and Elijah studied them, intently, his face growing increasingly troubled. "This code signature," he said finally. "I recognize it." "From where?" Zoe leaned over his shoulder. "It's based on a security bypass protocol I developed at MIT, never published. Just a theoretical exercise. Only 2 other people ever saw it." Elijah looked up. One was my brother, the other was Nathan Kessler. The implications hung in the air. Nathan, now at Vector Systems with Clayton, had either executed or authorized the breach using Elijah's own methods. "We need to confront him," Zoe said. Later that afternoon, Elijah and Zoe sat in the lobby of Vector Systems' Chicago office, waiting for Nathan to return from a meeting. When he finally appeared, his surprise at seeing them quickly gave way to practiced corporate cordiality. "Elijah, Ms. Mitchell, this is unexpected." He gestured toward the elevator. "My office?" Once in Nathan's sleek corner office, pleasantries were quickly abandoned. Elijah laid a printout of the intrusion code on the desk. "Recognize this?" Nathan glanced at it, his expression carefully neutral. "Should I? It's a modified version of the security bypass I showed you at MIT in 1998. The one I specifically said should never be implemented because it left no trace of the original access point. That was a long time ago, Elijah. Not too long for you to remember it well enough to use it against Langston." Elijah's voice remained calm, but his eyes held a cold intensity. "You accessed our servers last night." Nathan's smile faded. "That's a serious accusation without proof." "The code is the proof," Zoe interjected. "It's like a fingerprint. Circumstantial at best. Programmers borrow ideas all the time." Nathan leaned back in his chair. "Besides, what would we want with Langston's outdated algorithms? Our technology is generations ahead. Is that why you hired Clayton Riker and 6 of our engineers?" Elijah asked. Something flashed in Nathan's eyes, annoyance at being challenged perhaps, or frustration at being caught. "Corporate mobility is the nature of our industry. Surely you understand that." Elijah stood, gathering the printout. "You haven't learned anything in 20 years, Nathan. Still taking shortcuts, still hiding behind corporate doublespeak. And you're still naive about how business works," Nathan shot back, his composure finally cracking. "Some of us live in the real world, where ideals don't pay the bills." "They do when they're built into something people can trust," Elijah replied, moving toward the door. "Remember that when your copied algorithms fail because you didn't understand the underlying principles." As they left Vector Systems, Zoe glanced at Elijah. "That felt good. But what now? They have our code. They have a copy of what they think is important," Elijah corrected, "but they missed something crucial." Back at Langston, Elijah called an emergency meeting with the engineering team. "We have 3 weeks until the public announcement of our vehicle. We need to implement a safety enhancement I've been working on, one that wasn't in the server files." For the next 2 weeks, Langston's R&D department operated in a state of controlled urgency. Elijah's enhancement wasn't just a security patch, it was a fundamental improvement to the vehicle's learning capabilities, one that made the stolen algorithm look primitive by comparison. Meanwhile, online forums began filling with skepticism about Elijah's contributions. Anonymous accounts questioned whether he truly authored the breakthrough algorithm, suggesting he had simply taken credit for work done by Langston's team. "It's a coordinated campaign," Zoe said, showing Elijah the pattern of negative posts. "And look at this." She pulled up financial records she'd obtained through a friend in accounting. "Clayton still owns Langston stock through a shell company. He benefits if our valuation drops before the launch." The smear campaign intensified as the launch date approached. Tech blogs that had celebrated Elijah's story now ran headlines questioning his credentials. Clayton gave interviews hinting at the real story behind Langston's algorithm breakthrough. 3 days before the scheduled press conference, Langston held a full rehearsal. Elijah, who would be introducing the technology alongside Zoe, and the new CEO, Lisa Harmon, seemed unusually quiet. "Everything okay?" Zoe asked during a break. "Just thinking about what to say," Elijah replied. "They're trying to make this about me, but it's always been about the work." The morning of the press conference arrived with unexpected drama. Vector Systems had issued a press release announcing their own self-driving technology, scheduling a demonstration for the following week, clearly trying to steal Langston's thunder. The auditorium was packed with journalists, industry analysts, and investors. Camera crews lined the back wall. Social media representatives sat poised with their devices, ready to broadcast highlights. Lisa Harmon opened the event with corporate formalities, then introduced Zoe to explain the technical specifications. Finally, she turned to Elijah. And now, the man whose brilliant work made this breakthrough possible, Elijah Hayes. As Elijah approached the podium, a hush fell over the room. For a moment, he simply looked out at the sea of expectant faces, the red lights of recording devices, the glow of screens. Then, setting aside his prepared remarks, he spoke from the heart. 20 years ago, I lost everything for speaking truth about technology that wasn't ready. Technology that valued speed over safety. I became invisible because I refused to compromise. His voice gained strength. I spent those years watching, learning, fixing things others overlooked. Not because it was my job, but because that's who I am. The room was utterly silent. Today isn't about vindicating me. It's about remembering why we build these things in the first place, to serve humanity, not just shareholders. It's about the dignity of work, whether it's done in a corner office or while pushing a broom. He gestured toward the prototype vehicle displayed on stage. And it's about recognizing that brilliant minds exist everywhere, often in the places we're trained not to look. The applause began slowly, then swelled to fill the auditorium. Journalists were on their feet. Even cynical industry veterans found themselves moved by the unscripted sincerity of Elijah's words. By evening, clips of the speech had gone viral. Silent Brilliance and Elijah Hayes trended worldwide. The narrative had shifted, from questioning his credentials to celebrating his journey. The following day, Elijah faced the Langston board in a scheduled meeting, but instead of discussing the successful launch, he raised an unexpected concern. "We need to review all of Langston's partnerships," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "particularly those with companies like Vector Systems." "What are we looking at?" Margaret Baker asked, opening the file. "Evidence that Vector Systems has been involved in industrial espionage against multiple companies, not just Langston. They've also been associated with environmental violations and labor abuses overseas." The board members exchanged glances. "These are serious allegations, Elijah," one said. "They're documented facts. And Langston has 3 joint ventures with Vector Systems subsidiaries." Elijah leaned forward. "I'm asking the board to sever those relationships." The debate that followed was heated. Some board members argued that business realities required maintaining such partnerships. Others worried about legal repercussions of breaking contracts. Zoe, invited to present data on the financial implications, made the decisive argument. Ethical leadership isn't just morally right, it's increasingly profitable. Companies with documented ethical practices outperform their competitors by an average of 12% over 5 years. When the vote came, it was 7-3 in favor of Elijah's proposal. Langston would begin the process of unwinding its Vector Systems partnerships immediately. That evening, as Elijah was leaving the building, his phone rang with a call from Jamir. "Uncle Elijah," his nephew's voice was tight with concern. "Something weird is happening. I'm getting all these messages on social media from people asking about you, trying to get me to say stuff about our family." "What kind of stuff?" "Personal things. Family history. Some guy offered me money for stories about you." Jamir paused. "And there's a website with a bunch of lies about Dad and how he died. They're saying you made up the whole whistleblower story." Elijah's grip tightened. On the phone. "Don't respond to any of it, Jamir. This isn't about truth. It's about intimidation." After ensuring Jamir was safe, Elijah called Zoe and explained the situation. "They're targeting my family now. This has gone too far. I might have something that could help," Zoe replied. "Remember that tech influencer who was asking for an interview last week? Amanda Ross. She specializes in deep dives into industry ethics." "Set it up," Elijah said. "It's time to fight back with facts." 3 days later, Amanda Ross published a comprehensive analysis of Elijah's original prototype code from decades earlier, comparing it side by side with current industry standards. Her verdict was unequivocal. Elijah Hayes had been a pioneer whose work presaged modern developments by nearly 20 years. The article went viral, with leading engineers and academics adding their endorsements. Public opinion, already warming to Elijah after his speech, solidified in his favor. Then came the bombshell. A former Vector Systems employee, inspired by Elijah's story, anonymously leaked emails and documents proving not only the recent sabotage attempts, but a pattern of unethical practices authorized by both Nathan and Clayton. The evidence was damning enough to prompt a federal investigation. Within days, Vector Systems stock plummeted. Clayton and Nathan were placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. The company's planned technology demonstration was indefinitely postponed. At Langston, the mood was one of vindication but not celebration. Elijah insisted that the company take the high road, issuing a simple statement. "We build not just with code, but with conscience. That's the only sustainable path forward." When reporters pressed him for a more triumphant response, Elijah shook his head. "The work speaks. That's all I ever wanted." Morning sunlight glinted off a procession of vehicles winding through the Nevada desert. At the head of the line, Langston Innovations' prototype self-learning car navigated the rough terrain, with a fluid grace that made it seem almost alive. In the passenger seat, Elijah Hayes watched the navigation system respond to unexpected obstacles with the kind of intuitive precision that had been his life's work. "Nervous?" asked Zoe from the back seat, leaning forward to study the vehicle's dashboard display. "Not about the car," Elijah replied with a small smile. "About all of this." He gestured toward the media convoy following behind them, cameras capturing every moment of the journey. The government-sponsored Autonomous Vehicle Challenge had drawn competitors from around the world, tech giants and startups alike, all vying to demonstrate the future of transportation. After Langston's successful product launch 2 months earlier, the board had insisted on entering their vehicle in the competition. "It's not just about winning," Lisa Harmon, Langston's new CEO, had explained. "It's about showing the world what ethical innovation looks like." Now, as they approached the starting line of the final testing course, Elijah felt a responsibility that went beyond the competition. The car represented not just his redemption, but a vision of technology guided by human values, rather than just profit margins. In the staging area, engineers from competing companies made last-minute adjustments to their vehicles. Unlike most teams, who were programming specific responses to anticipated challenges, Elijah had insisted that Langston's approach be different. "We'll set the foundational parameters," he had told the engineering team. "But then we let the AI learn with minimal interference. That's the whole point, to create something that can truly adapt." Some board members had questioned this strategy. "We're risking too much," one had argued. "The other teams are programming for every possible scenario." "And that's exactly why they'll fail," Elijah had responded. "You can't anticipate everything. True intelligence comes from the ability to handle the unexpected." Now, as the competition officials gave final instructions, Elijah's confidence in the approach remained firm. He and Zoe joined the other spectators in the observation area, where large screens would display each vehicle's progress through the course. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced the head judge, "welcome to the final stage of the National Autonomous Vehicle Challenge. Today's course includes extreme terrain, weather simulations, unexpected obstacles, and complex decision-making scenarios. The vehicles will navigate without human intervention." One by one, the competing cars departed at 5-minute intervals. The first 2 entries performed well on the initial terrain challenges, but faltered when faced with a simulated flash flood. The third, from a Silicon Valley giant, made it further but stalled completely when confronted with an ethical decision scenario, choosing between hitting road debris or swerving into a safety barrier. When Langston's turn came, a hush fell over the crowd. The sleek silver vehicle started smoothly, its sensors continuously gathering and processing data about its environment. The first challenges, steep inclines, loose gravel, sharp turns, were navigated with fluid precision. As the car entered the weather simulation zone, heavy artificial rain reduced visibility to near zero. Where other vehicles had slowed to a crawl or stopped entirely, Langston's car adjusted its speed appropriately, but maintained its course. "It's reading the road texture through the water," Zoe explained to the journalists clustered nearby. The AI is prioritizing different sensory inputs based on conditions. On the screens, they watched as their vehicle approached the ethical decision scenario that had stumped the previous competitor. Road debris appeared suddenly, with a safety barrier on one side and a steep drop on the other. Elijah held his breath. Rather than choosing between two bad options, the car did something unexpected. It reduced speed instantly and maneuvered between the debris in a way none of the programmers had specifically encoded. It created a third option, Elijah whispered, a proud smile spreading across his face. As the vehicle continued through increasingly difficult challenges, Elijah's mind drifted back to the early days of his career. Images flashed through his memory. A much younger Elijah working late in an MIT lab, his brother Marcus watching with fascination as early prototypes lurched across test floors, the two of them dreaming of machines that could think. His reverie was interrupted by gasps from the crowd. On screen, another competitor's vehicle had malfunctioned on a narrow bridge section, blocking the path and sending warning signals. According to competition rules, this would require human intervention and disqualification for the stalled vehicle. But before the safety team could respond, Langston's car approached the scene. It stopped at a safe distance, assessed the situation, and then, to everyone's amazement, edged carefully forward and nudged the stalled vehicle to the side of the bridge, clearing the path. Did it just help the other car? Someone in the hardy crowd asked incredulously. Elijah nodded, his expression a mixture of surprise and vindication. We programmed basic assistance protocols, but the AI decided on its own that helping was the optimal solution. The unexpected act of cooperation between machines became the defining moment of the competition. By the time Langston's vehicle crossed the finish line, completing all challenges successfully, social media was already buzzing with clips of what journalists were calling the empathy protocol. The final standings were announced that afternoon under the Nevada sun. Langston Innovations had won by a significant margin, but the headlines weren't about victory. Instead, news outlets focused on how the vehicle had demonstrated something beyond mere navigation skills. AI vehicle shows. Empathy, the future of ethical technology. Langston's self-learning car assist competitor in unprecedented move. Hayes' model demonstrates machine cooperation rather than just competition. During the awards ceremony, a government representative approached Elijah with an unexpected proposal. The Department of Transportation is forming a council to develop ethical standards for autonomous technologies, she explained. We'd like you to be part of it. Elijah hesitated. I'm not much for bureaucracy or committees. We don't need another bureaucrat, Mr. Hayes. We need someone who understands that technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. She handed him her card. Think about it. This isn't about regulations. It's about shaping the future. Takti. At the hotel, as the Langston team celebrated their victory, Zoe found Elijah sitting alone on the terrace, looking at the stars. Everyone's wondering where our guest of honor disappeared to, she said, joining him. Just needed some quiet. He showed her the government official's card. They want me to help write ethical AI standards. That's perfect, you'd be. I turned down the full-time position, Elijah interrupted gently, but I agreed to mentor some of their younger engineers. He smiled at Zoe's surprised expression. I'm done with institutions. My place is with the next generation, not in committee rooms. Zoe nodded slowly. Speaking of the next generation, I have news. I've been approached by a publisher. They want me to write a book about your story, about the janitor who changed an industry. My story isn't finished yet, Elijah replied. That's what makes it compelling. Zoe hesitated. I'm calling it The Blueprint of a Janitor. What do you think? Elijah laughed softly. I think you should tell it your way. You've earned that. 2 weeks later, back in Chicago, Zoe stood on the red circular carpet of a TED Talk stage, addressing a packed auditorium and live stream audience of thousands. Brilliance has no badge, she began. No uniform, no title, no corner office. Sometimes it pushes a broom down empty hallways at night, solving problems others don't even recognize. Her presentation traced Elijah's journey from respected academic to whistleblower to janitor to industry pioneer again. The audience sat rapt as she revealed previously untold details of the algorithm that had changed transportation technology. The most revolutionary aspect wasn't in the code itself, she explained. It was in the philosophy behind it. Elijah Hayes didn't just teach machines to navigate roads, he taught them to value human life. As Zoe's talk went viral, garnering millions of views in days, Elijah was engaged in a very different conversation. He had requested, and been granted, a brief meeting with Clayton Riker, who was awaiting trial on charges of corporate espionage and securities fraud. They sat across from each other in a stark visitor's room, Clayton's expensive suit replaced by standard-issue clothing, his once commanding presence diminished by circumstance. "Why are you here?" Clayton asked, suspicion evident in his voice. "Come to gloat?" "No," Elijah replied simply. "I came to understand." "Understand what?" "You had every advantage," Elijah said, leaning forward slightly. "Education, wealth, position, power, and you wasted it all trying to be more important than useful." Clayton's face flushed with anger. "You don't know anything about me or what I built. I know you saw people as tools, not talent. I know you valued status over substance." Elijah's tone remained even, without malice. "And I know you never understood that true innovation comes from seeing potential where others don't bother to look." For a moment, genuine confusion crossed Clayton's face. "Why do you care? You won. I lost. It's done. Because your story matters." "Too," Elijah replied, as a warning, if nothing else. Back in his old neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, Elijah put his resources to use in an unexpected way. The abandoned garage where his brother Marcus had once tinkered with cars became Hayes Innovation Workshop, a community tech club for local youth. With simple tools, donated computers, and Elijah's patient guidance, neighborhood kids who had never considered careers in technology began building their own robots and simple AI systems. Twice a week, engineers from Langston volunteered as mentors, including Wilson Gardner, who had become one of Elijah's strongest supporters. In late spring, an envelope arrived bearing the MIT seal. Janitor had been accepted to the engineering program. With a full scholarship, he drove immediately to his uncle's workshop to share the news. "I knew you could do it," Elijah said, embracing his nephew. "Your father would be so proud." Janitor grinned, but his expression soon turned serious. "It's because of you, you know. Not just the recommendation letter, but everything else. Watching you stand up for what's right, even when it cost you everything." Elijah shook his head. "No, you earned this on your own merit." "Maybe," Janitor conceded. "But because of you, I stayed with it. When other kids were giving up on math and science, saying it wasn't for people like us, I remembered my uncle who knew how to build thinking machines." As summer approached, the tech world's attention turned to Washington, where congressional hearings on AI regulation had begun. Though invited to testify, Elijah declined, preferring to submit written recommendations. Instead, his focus remained on the garage workshop and his consulting role at Langston, where he continued to refine the vehicle's learning capabilities. The Hayes model, as it had been officially named, was scheduled for limited production in the fall. The IDICE, first commercially available truly self-learning vehicle, certified under the new federal guidelines that Elijah had helped shape. On a warm July evening, music and laughter filled the street outside Elijah's modest home. The neighborhood had organized a block party, officially to celebrate summer, but everyone knew it was really about Elijah. No cameras were present, no media, no corporate representatives, just neighbors, friends, and the kids from the workshop. Folding. Tables lined the sidewalks, laden with homemade dishes. Mr. Washington from the corner house played saxophone with a small jazz combo. Children darted between adults, their faces sticky with ice cream and joy. Elijah moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations and deflecting praise with his characteristic humility. These were the people who had seen him leave for work, each morning in his maintenance uniform, who had nodded hello when he swept their children's school auditorium during evening events, who had never treated him as invisible, even when the corporate world did. The silver prototype vehicle, now officially his, was parked at the curb, polished to a mirror shine. Throughout the evening he gave rides to neighborhood children, explaining in simple terms how the car thought and learned. As the sun began to set, Elijah slipped away from the festivities and sat alone in the vehicle. He ran his hand along the dashboard, appreciating the craftsmanship and the journey it represented. To his surprise, the audio system activated on its own, and the opening notes of John Coltrane's A Love Supreme filled the car, his favorite jazz composition, one he often hummed while working. A note on the display read, "A small addition. Thank you for everything." Zoe, Elijah smiled, touched by the thoughtful gesture. She had programmed the car to recognize and play his preferred music without being asked, a small human touch in a technological marvel. Later that evening, as the party wound down, Zoe found him sitting on his front porch steps. "Quite a celebration," she said, joining him. "More than I deserve. Less than you deserve," she corrected gently. "But exactly what you needed." They sat in comfortable silence, for a moment, watching as neighbors packed up folding chairs and children chased fireflies in the gathering dusk. "I'm leaving Langston," Zoe said finally. Elijah turned to her, surprised. "The R&D position was incredible experience," she finished, "but I'm starting something new. A consulting firm focused on ethical technology design. We've already got 3 clients lined up, including the Department of Transportation. Sounds like you don't need my mentorship anymore," Elijah said with a proud smile. Zoe shook her head. "That's not how it works. You just didn't need permission to shine." She paused. "That's what I learned from you, Elijah. Not the coding or the engineering, though that was valuable too, but the courage to stand in your truth without apology." The following Saturday, Elijah hosted a special workshop session. 20 children from the neighborhood gathered in the renovated garage, eyes wide with excitement as he unveiled a set of new robotics kits. "Today we're going to build machines that can make decisions," he explained. "But first we need to talk about what makes a good decision." A boy in the back row raised his hand. "My dad says I need to be an accountant. Says there's no money in this robot stuff." Elijah studied the child thoughtfully. "What's your name?" "Marcus," the boy replied. "Like your brother in the pictures." "Well, Marcus, let me ask you something. What do you love to build?" The boy thought for a moment. "Stuff that moves, that does things on its own." "Then that's what you should learn about," Elijah said simply. "I was a janitor's son. So was my brother. Remember that." The workshop proceeded, with children breaking into groups to assemble simple robots programmed to navigate obstacle courses. Elijah moved between tables, offering guidance where needed but mostly encouraging the students to solve problems themselves. In the corner, Jameer worked with the youngest children, displaying the same patience his uncle had shown him years earlier. "It's not about being perfect," Elijah overheard him saying to a frustrated girl. "It's about figuring out what doesn't work so you can find what does." Later that month, Langston Innovations held a formal ceremony to rename their R&D building. Despite his reluctance to be the center of attention, Elijah agreed to attend, on one condition. "I'll come if you'll commit to opening the facility to public school students on weekends," he told Lisa Harmon. "Free access, real equipment, real mentorship." Lisa agreed without hesitation, and on a bright Thursday morning, the Elijah Hayes Innovation Center was officially dedicated. The ceremony was brief, with Elijah making only a short statement of thanks before turning attention to the educational initiative that would allow students from across Chicago to access cutting-edge technology. The following day, before dawn, Elijah returned to the center. With a borrowed broom, he swept the sidewalk outside the building bearing his name, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. The rhythmic motion brought a familiar peace, a connection to the years when his work had gone unseen but had still mattered to him. As he swept, he noticed a young security guard watching him curiously from the doorway. "Morning," Elijah said with a nod. "Mr. Hayes, what are you doing? We have maintenance staff for that." Elijah smiled. "Just finding my old habits." The guard looked confused but nodded respectfully before returning inside. As the rising sun painted the sky in shades of gold and pink, Elijah paused in his sweeping. For a brief moment, his mind flashed back decades, to a young Elijah and his brother Marcus, surrounded by tools and parts, working on an old junk car in their father's garage. The memory was so vivid, he could almost hear Marcus's laughter, feel the weight of the wrench in his hand, smell the motor oil. Then he was back in the present, watching as the same car, now transformed into the autonomous Hayes model, navigated smoothly through early morning traffic, a testament to dreams that had taken a lifetime to realize. That afternoon, Elijah visited Marcus's grave one more time. He placed a small model of the Hayes vehicle beside the headstone. "We did it, brother," he said softly. "Not the way we planned, not when we hoped, but we did it." In the weeks that followed, Elijah settled into a rhythm that balanced his consulting work at Langston with his community workshop. He declined most interview requests and speaking engagements, preferring to let his work speak for itself. But when a documentary filmmaker asked to feature the neighborhood workshop in a series about unconventional education, Elijah agreed, on the condition that the focus remain on the students rather than himself. During filming, the director asked Elijah to summarize his journey. After a thoughtful pause, he replied, "They gave me a broom. I built a machine. They gave me silence. I made it sing." The filmmaker used this quote to close the documentary, superimposed over images of Elijah working alongside neighborhood children, their faces alight with discovery and possibility. The final scene showed Elijah in the prototype vehicle, now permanently his, driving through his old neighborhood. He waved to children who recognized him not as a celebrity or a genius or even an engineer, but simply as Mr. Hayes, the man who believed they could build amazing things. As the screen faded to black, a simple message appeared, inspired by millions of unseen minds who build without applause. How many brilliant minds do we pass by every day, invisible simply because we've decided what genius looks like? Like and subscribe for more stories that will change how you see the world around you.